Reverse by Black K. Cat. Chapter 45. Koteri. It's still far too soon to catch so much as a glimpse of water country on the horizon, but Kurama hasn't moved from the ship's railing in hours. Regardless, the wind and spray are viciously icy and the deck is slick, but Kurama stays where he is even after several times tries to hint that he should go below. Kurama is tempted to go get Momiji to ask the fox to fly in the rest of the way so that he can get there first, so that he doesn't have to wait. But he doesn't, not yet. There's a storm ahead of them, and while says they'll make it through after it breaks, Momiji would have to detour around it or suffer the winds, and Kurama won't put him in that position. He's just frustrated, impatient. Naruto is up there beyond the horizon, and Kurama is utterly fiercely determined that after this, he won't let them be separated for this long again. He rubs a hand through his hair, grimacing a little at the way the tips of the wet strands are starting to freeze, and folds down to rest his elbows on the railing, eyes on the dark clouds. There's been no word on Akatsuki that he's heard. No word on much of anything, though Jiraiya managed to get his hands on a report of Kumonin heading into Moon Country, probably to investigate the mountain's graveyard. And while no news is likely a good thing, it's also potentially really, really bad. Obito is tricky at the best of times, and never more so than when he's been outmaneuvered. There's no chance of predicting his movements through what Kurama knows of the future. He might have the basic outline, but all the rest of what he remembers is completely useless now, and has been since he grabbed Naruto and ran. It's a little unnerving not having even the faintest idea what Akatsuki is going to do now. Just like everyone else in the world, Kurama supposes with a wry smile. Besides, Naruto has a family. Kurama would make any change necessary if it ended in his Jinchuriki being happy. Over the creak and crash of the ship moving, he hears slightly unsteady footsteps nearing and turns just in time to see Tsunade collapse over the rail, fighting green. She groans, pressing her hands to either side of her head, and Kurama snorts.
Keep laughing, shortcake,
Tsunade threatens darkly.
I'm going to remember this.
Kurama knows better than to take an Uzumaki woman's threats lightly, even if that Uzumaki woman happens to be half Senju. He rolls his eyes, but doesn't mock even when she makes a noise like she's dying. Could be worse, he points out. I could have asked for something a lot more humiliating than visiting your almost nephew. Tsunade's expression darkens, and Kurama is absolutely sure that she's remembering Jiraiya's cheerful suggestions for her forfeit. Not that he got all that many out before Tsunade punched him hard enough that even Kurama winced.
You, she bites out, seem at least mildly intelligent. Don't ruin my preconceptions by doing something that stupid.
Casting him a narrow look, she sighs and kneads at her temples.
Why the hell aren't you hungover? I distinctly remember you getting tipsy halfway through the night.
Kurama just grins at her, all teeth. He's not about to tell Tsunade that she got enough liquor in him that even his healing got bogged down for a while trying to burn it all off. He managed, and Tsunade was on the floor a little after midnight. That's a victory in his books. You're not going to heal yourself, he asks instead. What's the point of all that talent if you can't even fix a hangover?
Tsunade pulls a face. I promised Yazune that I wouldn't,
she says.
She seems to think it's nothing less than I deserve for drinking. Besides, every time I heal myself, I cut time off my lifespan. A hangover isn't worth dying even earlier than I already will. It's tempting to call bullshit.
The Tsunade that Kurama remembers was fierce and strong, well into her 80s, and no one could ever tell by looking at her that she wasn't the 20-something woman she appeared. Still, the promise to Shizune is reason enough, and if Tsunade has to justify it to herself, that's her problem. With a soft breath, not quite heavy enough to be a sigh, Tsunade leans forward, bracing herself against the rail and turning her face into the spray.
You'd really spend a favor from me just so I'd meet Kushina's son?
She asks, glancing over at Kurama and lifting a brow. Kurama just grunts. Your family, he says gruffly. Naruto needs all the family that he can get. A flick of his eyes, taking in her hunched posture, the lines of weariness in her face that are from stress rather than age, and he turns away again. I could be wrong, but you look like someone who needs that too. Tsunade's mouth pulls tight, grimness and grief in equal measure, and she blows out a shaky sigh.
Believe me, Shortcake, the last thing anyone needs is me getting close to them.
With that, she shoves away from the railing and stalks away, sandals clicking loudly across the deck.
Stupid dramatic shinobi.
Kurama thinks, but doesn't say, only just managing not to roll his eyes. He can't tell who's worse. His Naruto with his melodramatic sacrifices, Tsunade clinging to her grief, Sasuke in his timeline being a theatrical little jerk, or Obito caught up in his delusions. There are more too. Those are just the ones who get the prize for making Kurama want to roll his eyes the most. Practically everyone else in the shinobi world is a runner-up though, and some far more than others. Driving away your allies already, Kurama? A dry voice asks. Speak of the devil, Kurama thinks, amused and glances over to watch Kakashi take Tsunade's spot his back to the ocean and that ridiculous buck out in front of him. Doesn't that thing have enough stains on it already? He asks, equally dry. Kakashi flicks a glance at his book, then at Kurama, and his eye crinkles. You make it sound so dirty, Kurama! He protests. Kurama snorts. You're the one reading porn in public. He points out. So you read them! Kakashi sounds caught midway between cheerful and mischievous, and he's watching Kurama with interest, not even pretending to read. That gets him an incredulous, derisive huff, and Kurama folds his arms over his chest, glaring pointedly. Not on your life. I don't need to have read them to know what they're about. The title kind of gives it away. Kakashi flips the novel around to study the front like he's forgotten what it says, then makes a thoughtful noise. Haven't you ever heard don't judge a book by its cover? He asks mildly. Like meeting the perverted old geezer isn't enough of a clue what it's about. Kurama retorts. Whatever, keep your point. If you try to make me read it, I'm stuffing it down your throat. Kakashi clutches the book to his chest with a theatrical sound of horror. Kurama! He protests. You would do something like that to an innocent book? Kurama rolls his eyes hard. That book is about as far from innocent as it can get without actually dripping sin. Very pointedly, Kakashi slides it into one of the inside pockets of his flak jacket, carefully tucking it out of sight. Some people, he says airily, have no appreciation of quality literature. Another eye roll, and Kakashi is rapidly moving up Kurama's list. He doesn't bother answering, turning his gaze back to the horizon. The last scattered rays of sun vanish up ahead of them, overwhelmed by heavy dark clouds, and he can't see beyond them no matter how hard he looks. Kiri is beyond them, hours distant, and the impatience itches at Kurama's bones, deep and maddening. Did you want something? He asks distractedly, other than waving your porn in my face. For a long moment, Kakashi looks like he's struggling not to make the obvious joke, but Kurama's dark look makes him raise his hands and surrender. I just had some questions, he says, mildly enough that Kurama looks up suspiciously, eyes narrowing. Kakashi meets his stare, for once not even faking a smile. The passenger room is empty if you want to talk there. It's better than having this conversation out in the open. So Kurama nods once, sharply, and turns on his heel. He leads the way below deck, down a narrow corridor with crew berths on one side and storage on the other, and steps into the tiny room, like the one Kakashi used when he was hurt. It's a different room, a different ship, but Kurama doesn't wait to take in the differences. He sinks down on the bed, watching Kakashi take the lone chair that's bolted to the floor and crosses his arms over his chest. Kakashi looks back at him, visible brow lifting, and sighs a little. You didn't tell me anything before, he points out, and when Kurama opens his mouth to protest, he cuts him off with, Nothing solid. Are you trying not to change things? Kurama hesitates, but wasn't he just thinking how the timeline he came from is practically obsolete? There's likely no harm in giving away a few details now that Kakashi already has so many. Not all of them, but some will be fine. I stopped trying to keep things the same back in Konoha, he admits gruffly, leaning back to brace his shoulders against the wall. If they went badly enough the first time that I had to come back, Why try the same thing all over again? Kakashi hums in what could be agreement or simple acknowledgement, though his gaze stays firmly on Kurama. That body belongs to an Uzumaki, he says carefully. The statement, simple as it is, makes Kurama curl his fingers into fists, jolts across his nerves like an old ache suddenly flaring to life. He takes a breath, holds it for a moment, and then lets it out. Yeah, it did. Were there more in your time? Kakashi asks, and if Kurama weren't looking for it, he wouldn't see the faint tightening of the lines around Kakashi's eyes, as much of a tell as his mask allows for. Kurama snorts, closing his eyes. You mean before everything went south? Just two. It's very nearly possible to see the pieces falling into order as Kakashi watches him, tiny hints that most people would gloss over or forget, clicking together to form a whole picture. Kakashi hesitates, then nods once and asks, How far in the future? The Nanadame's reign. When he sees Kakashi open his mouth to ask another question, Kurama ups. Does it really matter? He asks, maybe a little testily. None of this is important anymore. Kage is not coming back without the Geto Mazo, and we broke it. That already makes my future obsolete. But not your enemies, Kakashi points out. He studies Kurama for one more moment, then asks, so quietly that Kurama can barely hear him. That's Naruto's body, isn't it? The noise that wrenches itself from Kurama's throat is painful, involuntary. He shoves away from the wall, rising to his feet, and turns away so that he doesn't have to look Kakashi in the face. Fuck you! He bites out, pressing a hand over his face. Do you think I wanted this? I didn't even know what the idiot was planning until it was already done. He could have defended himself, but instead he wasted every last drop of his damn chakra and Sakura's. She could have saved him! Kakashi doesn't say anything, but Kurama can feel the Kapinin's gaze between his shoulder blades pressing against his spine like a physical weight. He takes a shuddering breath, ducking his head to get himself back under control, and lets his hands curl into fists, the tips of his nails biting into his palms. Another breath, a third, a fourth, careful and measured, and he finally feels steady enough to pick his head up, staring at the wooden wall in front of him. Yes, he answers tightly. This is Naruto's body. He painted the seals on himself so it would travel back, even knowing that the trip would kill him, and leave me possessing it. But Kaguya killed him right as he activated it. I healed, but... A long stretch of silence from Kakashi, and then he says quietly, Sometimes the hardest choices to live with are the ones other people make for you. Kurama barks out a rough laugh because he's never heard anything truer. Yeah. He agrees, tired and grim, and slides back down to sit, though he can't quite bring himself to look at Kakashi. One half a glance and... Kakashi pulls out his book, settling back gingerly in his chair and flips it open with a quiet hum. Before he can stop himself, Kurama laughs, hoarse and a little choked, and scrubs his hands across his face. Of course! That's just typical. But Kurama is kind of bewildered to realize that he doesn't mind. He breathes, taking in the quiet that's broken only by the intermittent rustle of pages turning and the odd giggle, and lets his grief and anger fade 1 inch at a time. Too much still, too strong, but maybe it's getting easier to handle, slowly but surely. Kakashi doesn't leave, and Kurama doesn't ask for solitude. No platitudes, no words at all, but inhale, exhale. That's pretty close to moving forward. And it's enough. They reach Kiri just as dawn breaks on the last dissipating wind of the storm. The harbor is quiet, only a pair of Chunin on duty and a few fishermen setting out, and Ao's crew steered them safely into their berth. Kurama hardly manages to wait until they've started tossing lines before he's vaulting over the side to land lightly on the dock, Momiji draped across his shoulders like a sleepy skunk. The village itself starts just up ahead, wood and stone giving way to packed earth streets, and he heads for it at a near trot, ignoring the call of his name from behind him. The sun is rising, casting long shadows across the path and over the faces of the handful of people he crosses paths with, but Kurama doesn't slow even when Ameyuri waves cheerfully to him.
He can feel Naruto's chakra up ahead like a sun-bright beacon and isn't about to let anything stop him.
You're bastard, Roshi complains, jogging a few paces to fall into step with him. Can't you give a body 5 seconds to grab the gear?
With a snort, Kurama glances over his shoulder to see Han following behind, expression placid, though he raises a brow when he catches Kurama's eye.
You were very quick off the mark, he agrees, though his tone is mostly amused. There at Zabuza still?
Kurama rolls his eyes, but turns back around, judging distance.
Yeah, he agrees, putting one hand up to stroke Momiji's ears.
The fox turns his head into the touch, but doesn't otherwise stir.
Seems like it.
Roshi grunts, hitching his back up on his shoulder.
Whatever, he huffs. Nice to get away from B for a bit, so I don't blame you for rushing. I forgot how aggravating translating everything from rap was.
Snorting, Kurama runs off the main street, heading down the side road that runs along the coastal cliffs, and will take them back to Zabuza's house, deeper in the forest. He keeps all of his senses strained ahead, feels a whisper of familiar chakra rising to touch his own, and smiles a little, returning Matatabi's light nudge across the mental plane.
They're going to be gathering a welcoming committee,
Han says, smiling as he tips his hat down over his eyes.
More like a mob,
Roshi retorts, amused, and then casts a glance at Kurama.
He hesitates for a moment before he asks, Got ideas for after this? Going to stay in Kiri? Kurama blinks, dragged away from watching the far end of the path where it curves into the trees, and raises an eyebrow a little at the other redhead. I wasn't planning on it, he answers. The Kage gave me a pardon, so I was going to head back to Konoha.
Roshi makes a sound that's somewhere between confusion and surprise.
Really? I thought you were just telling the Toad Sage that to get him off your back. You want to go back to one of the villages?
With a faint sigh that says dealing with Roshi is something he should really be getting S-rank mission hazard pay for, Han lightly slaps his friend in the back of the head.
You're in a village right now, in case you hadn't noticed. But Kiri is fine, but I sure wouldn't want to live here for any longer than I absolutely had to, Roshi retorts, aiming a kick at Armored Chins. Look me in the eye and tell me that you want to be part of a village again, Han.
Han is silent for a long moment, then tips his hat down even further, trying to hide his face.
Of course I would like to be,
he says quietly.
I've spent the majority of my life alone, surviving by myself, never certain what will happen in a day, a week, a year. There is very little I would like more than the chance to rejoin a village and be a part of something larger, grander. What I don't want is everything that would come with it. The hatred, the fear, the whispers in the streets, being thought a monster for nothing more than something that was decided for me.
Sometimes the hardest choices to live with are the ones other people make for you.
It echoes in Kurama's head, too soft for the grim, bitter recognition that it brings, and he smiles crookedly, turning his eyes up to the cloudy sky. Doesn't say it because Roshi and Han already know, even if they've never explicitly put it into words before. He thinks of Naruto, of the hatred and resentment buried deep inside of him, curled up in the darkest parts of his soul. It never really went away. Naruto may have accepted it about himself in order to control Kurama's power, but he never banished it entirely, even as Nanadaime. It was always a thought, never quite conscious, but held in the very back of his mind. What if they go back to resentment? What if I choose wrong and they call me a monster again? What if what I am causes me to lose everything for a second time? Kurama wonders sometimes if he was the only one who ever saw it. Sasuke might have, but he worshipped Naruto. Naruto was the most precious thing to him, the way he was to Naruto, and love like that might see flaws, but it makes them beautiful instead of emphasizing them. Sakura might have, because she was undeniably brilliant. Likely not Yamato, and definitely not Sai. Possibly Kakashi, but he was busy as Rokudame at first, and then he was dead. Kurama was likely the only one, and while he stopped trying to draw it out in his Jinchuriki, he always knew it was there. Remember what you told me before we left? He asks, drawing both men's eyes to him. He meets Hans, and seeing only confusion there, has to smile a little. When you both were being bull-headed bastards in the kitchen. I wanted to leave you behind, and you told me that if we went together, none of us would have to fight alone. Tipping one shoulder in a half-hearted shrug, he looks out towards the ocean. I'm going back to Konoha because I promised the old pervert, and because it's where Naruto needs to be. Anyone who wants to come? Well, nothing has to change between the 9 of us, right? Like a miniature village, Roshi says with some amusement, folding his arms in front of his chest. Perfectly suited for you,
Han agrees, hiding a smile behind one head and sidestepping Roshi's aggravated cake.
You dumb walking haystack! I'd say pick on someone your own size, but the trees haven't done anything to deserve you. I don't know where you're attempting to aim, but that's my thigh. I swear I will cut you off in the knees. Come on, me! The sudden cry makes Kurama wrench around, entirely forgetting the spectacle of Han and Roshi's argument. Yukito is at the bend of the road laughing, and a blonde blur is halfway to them. His heart trips in his chest, and he takes 4 long, quick strides, bending down just as Naruto reaches him. The little boy slams into his chest, laughing, and Kurama scoops him up. He hugs him as tightly as he can, buries his face in wild golden hair, and feels small arms wrap around his neck in return, squeezing almost as tightly. There's something wet against his cheek. Not his own tears, not this time, and Kurama lets out a quiet sound, sinking to his knees in the dirt and gently rubbing Naruto's back. I'm back, he whispers. I'm back now, I promise, and I won't leave you again. I'm home, Naruto. Naruto hiccups, pulling back just a little, even though he doesn't let go of his death grip around Kurama's neck. His face is covered in tears and the beginnings of snot, and his expression is scrunched up in confusion. But this isn't home, Kurama-ni! Caught, Kurama can't do anything but laugh, leaning forward to tap his brow against Naruto's. It kind of is, Kit, he says. You're all I need. Everything else is negotiable. That makes Naruto screw his face up, clearly trying not to cry anymore, and he throws himself forward, cracking his head into Kurama's jaw. Kurama winces slightly, shifting back, though he's definitely not anywhere close to wanting Naruto to let go, and looks up again. Gaara is just getting close, and when he sees Kurama watching, he stops, hesitating. With a chuckle, Kurama stretches his free arm out, and Gaara practically lunges for him, immediately slamming into the left side of Kurama's chest with enough force to make him grunt. Small hands clutch as his shirt, grip and pull as Gaara tries to worm his way even closer, and Kurama wraps his arm around him, humming softly. Hey, Squirt, he says, feeling the boy's chest hitch. Missed you, kid. Felt like a lot longer than 7 days, didn't it? Silently, Gaara nods and then asks in a bare whisper, We're not negotiable, are we, Kurama-ni? You're not, Kurama promises, kissing his hair. Never, Gaara. The 4 of you are mine. You got that? There's a choked sound, and an instant later, another body is squirming its way into the press. Fu wriggles her way in between Gaara and Naruto, tucking herself under Kurama's chin, and gives a happy, watery laugh. You're ours too, she declares. We're never going to let you go. Damn, Kurama says, mock disappointed. And here I thought I could ditch you all over the ocean. I'll have to come up with a better plan. He manages to get a hand free to stroke her hair, then looks up for the wayward final member of their little bureau. Yukito is just within arm's reach, smiling, and when Kurama looks at her expectantly, she laughs and ducks around behind him, throwing her arms around him and pressing herself up against his spine. We've missed you, Kurama-ni, she says softly. I don't want you to leave again. I won't, Kurama assures her and meets Fu's eyes, then Gaara's, then Naruto's as they all look up at him. He says it again, as firmly as he can manage. I won't. Next time we go somewhere, you can bet like hell that it's going to be together. What he said, Roshi offers, leaning against one of the boulders that line the path. When Kurama shoots him a questioning look, he smiles a little wryly and confirms, all of us. Han nods his agreement, standing with his arms folded over his chest and a smile in his eyes. I'd like to see anyone in the world try to separate us, he says, cheerful, but with a definite edge of darkness. And then, I have always wanted to see Konoha.
We're going back?
Naruto asks interestedly.
Oh! Gigi is going to be so happy I can do the chains and the gloves! Do you think I can be Hokage now? I'd be good at it!
The best, I'm sure. Kurama agrees, not quite sure if he's being wry or nostalgic. He shifts his grip, and with a theatrical groan of effort, he levers himself to his feet, taking all 4 children with him. Oh, Sage, have you been eating bricks?
Karamani!
Fu protests, squirming harder, while Miji gets displaced with a startled affronted yip spilling off of Kurama's shoulders and a tumble of limbs and tails, only to have Roshi catch him halfway down. He claws his way up onto the man's broad shoulders, then settles down with a huff. Sorry, Mamiji, Fu says sheepishly. The Reynard flicks his tails at her, dismissing the words, and leaps down. I should find my sister, he says, then bounds away, vanishing into the bushes without a sound. And you, Kurama adds, need to start packing. One more long trip and we can put down roots for a while, okay?
Okay, Karamani!
Naruto says, the cheer back in his voice. He wriggles up until he's half draped over Kurama's shoulder and asks curiously,
Who is the old lady?
Turning, Kurama spots Tsunade and Jiraiya behind them on the path, with Kakashi and his squad following them. Tsunade looks amused as she studies them, and Jiraiya long-suffering. It's probably safe to assume that Tsunade didn't hear the old comment then. Healthier for them all that way, Kurama supposes. She's kind of your aunt, he tells Naruto, and the look he shoots Tsunade dares her to contradict the statement. Her mom was an Uzumaki, just like yours.
Hi, old lady!
Naruto says cheerfully, giving her a happy wave, and this time it's loud enough that there's no way Tsunade could have missed it.
On cue, a vein starts ticking in her temple, and she growls, taking a threatening step closer with her fist raised. What was that, brat?
Apparently recognizing a sore spot when it's prodded, Naruto gives a trickster grin and repeats without fear,
Old lady! 'Cause you look like one! What you?
Thankfully, Jiraiya catches her before she can get any closer and drags her back a few paces.
Easy, Hime, easy. He's just a kid, he doesn't know how to respect a mature woman. Ow! What was that for? Fat groping me!
Tsunade hauls off and punches him again.
And that's for calling me old. Mature isn't. It was a compliment. You perverted old.
Come on. Kurama tells his burdens with a roll of his eyes, hitching them up a little higher and heading back towards Zabuza's house. Let's leave them to it. Oh! Fu cranes her neck to keep watching. She's amazing! She just split a tree in half with one punch. Yugito makes a noise that's equal parts agreeing and mildly besotted. Do you think she can teach us to do that? She asks, very interested. It's maybe just slightly possible that Kurama didn't think enough of this through. It's not like Jinchuriki need help to be scarier, but Tsunade's influence won't make them anything else. Well, as long as they're having fun, he supposes. Brats, he says, and for once he doesn't even try to pretend that it's not wholly fun.